The echo chambers exist to get people angry, and then these angry people head to the battlefield, and all that's left is devastation. Hey everyone, this is Mike from Catholic Treehouse. I'd like to welcome you to episode 43 of the Saint in Progress podcast, your source for inspiration, information, and directions for your soul's journey back home to the Father's house. As always, you can find us at catholictreehouse.com or saintinprogress.com and on Substack at catholictreehouse.substack.com. Like many people, this past week has been trying to get through the day, going from task to task without getting swallowed by the news cycle. I mean, there's so much going on right now, right? I don't care what side of the political spectrum you might happen to be on. It's been kind of difficult to not try to get sucked back in, if you're anything like me and most of the people that I know. Now, obviously, the big news is still Charlie Kirk and everything surrounding his assassination. But let's zoom out a bit more. Actually, let's zoom out a lot more. Let's look at the news cycle in general, shall we? And let's look at where we get our news. So, of course, we have the news on TV, the nonstop, whenever you want it, news that, started with CNN way back in the day with the first cable news network that, you could, 24 hours a day, you could just click on CNN and get the news. Well, CNN transformed how we got our news. Used to be, it would just be the evening news, right? That would come on, and then you get the 11 o'clock news or whatever, and maybe you get your evening newspaper that would have the summary of everything that's going on, or the morning newspaper, whatever the case may be. But now, thanks to CNN, thanks to the internet, we now have a 24/7 news cycle that is constantly dedicated to pumping out news minute by minute as soon as things happen, a lot of times without a whole heck of a lot of fact checking going on. So that brings me to a bit of a point here. So between the TV news and news websites, most of what we consume these days is yellow journalism. It's a nonstop running spigot of whatever the topic du jour is, but this yellow journalism is prevalent no matter where you happen to get it from, either the internet or from the TV news. Now, what is yellow journalism? If you haven't heard the term yellow journalism before, you're not alone. It's a term that's kind of fallen out of favor as it becomes more and more prevalent, which is kind of ironic, I think. You see, back in the day, which now that I'm thinking about it, makes me feel really old, but like 30 years ago when I was in high school, oh my gosh, it was a little bit more than 30 years. But anyway, let's not talk about that. Our journalism teacher taught us that a good journalist, what good journalism is to report the facts, to fact check, and to have multiple sources for the information, reliable sources, all this kind of thing. And he taught us that the journalist's job is only to report those facts, and everything else belongs in the op-ed section. That's where the opinions go, not in the news reporting. So anything that a journalist does to slant the news, to conform to whatever viewpoint he or she might happen to have, that's called yellow journalism, because it is coloring the news the way the reporter wants it to look. It is no longer black and white. It's now tinted with yellow. And that means that it is supporting the reporter's own viewpoint and not actually reporting the facts of the news. Most of what passes for news today, well, it's some shade of yellow. So anyways, that's the mainstream news. And how else do we get our news? Well, there's social media, and people can share their own versions of the news, complete with comments and commentary. And, let's take this video clip and let's edit it down so that it, this pull quote that doesn't contain the entire quote of what somebody said. This pull quote proves my point. Let's ignore what the rest of the quote is. All that kind of stuff. That's all over social media. And then, of course, people will link to, other places that support their own viewpoint and so on and so forth. Now, the problem is, if you look at, the tone of everything, there are essentially two types of conversations happening in today's society. Either there's the echo chamber where people go to get pumped up for their side and their viewpoint, and They go in with a confirmation bias, and wherever they go, that's what they hear is more people confirming what they already have come to believe. Or there's the battlefield where people go specifically to argue. So you got the echo chamber and the battlefield. There is no reasoned debate anymore. There is no civility. The echo chambers exist to get people angry, and then these angry people head to the battlefield, and all that's left is devastation. And none of this is of Christ. None of it. People throw around hot takes and logical fallacies, and no one wants to have a dialogue anymore. Well, Charlie Kirk apparently did, but the echo chambers edited his comments enough to get the assassin so angry that all he saw was someone who, in his mind, deserved to die. But all this is a reflection of where we are as a society, because it's not just about the news anymore. It's not just about politics. It's bigger and yet more personal than that. It's about my side versus your side. It's about who can shout louder. It's about who can throw the most insults and dredge up the most dirt. It's not about facts or reason. It's about anger. And none of this is of Christ. Now, St. James, in the 3rd chapter of his epistle, had this to say: "How great a forest is set ablaze by a small fire, and the tongue is a fire. The tongue is placed among our members as a world of iniquity. It stains the whole body, sets on fire the cycle of nature, and is itself set on fire by hell. For every species of beast and bird, of reptile and sea creature can be tamed and has been tamed by the human species. But no one can tame the tongue, a restless evil, full of deadly poison. With it we bless the Lord and Father, and with it we curse those who are made in the likeness of God. For the same mouth comes blessing and cursing. My brothers and sisters, this ought not to be so." I just heard recently that St. Thomas Aquinas said that the sins of gossip are worse than murder, because when you destroy someone's reputation with words, they have to live with the damage you do for long after you say it. What would the angelic doctor think of the internet today, where you can comment on something and that comment will stick around basically forever? So the sins of your keyboard harm someone with far greater reach and for far longer than just saying uncharitable things about them at the neighborhood pub. We're talking about a place where what you say against someone else and what they say about you can be read by spouses, children, employers, future employers, family, friends, co-workers, neighbors, literally anyone. And those comments will last for longer than anyone really wants them to, more likely than not. The words you type, those comments you leave, those are actions. In the day and age of the internet, those actions can have long-lasting consequences for you and for the people you comment about. And if something you say today has negative consequences for someone a decade from now, rest assured that when you appear on the judgment seat, the just judge will render judgment accordingly. Now, last night, my family and I went to Holy Hour at our church, and I went to confession. I normally have a pretty good rhythm of how often I go, but the rhythm got broken, and so rather than being able to just simply recall all of my screw-ups, I had to spend some time doing an examination of conscience by looking over various lists. And it struck me how many sins can be committed with just the tongue, and how many virtues are broken when we do it. So, my fellow saints in progress, here is a list of questions from several different examinations of conscience that deal with sins of the tongue. Now, as I read them, think about how you use the internet and text messages. Examine your conscience, and if necessary, get to confession. Ready? The sins of gossip. Curiosity, which is a desire to acquire knowledge that is not due one's state in life. Detraction, the unjust damaging of another's good name by the revelation of some fault or crime of which the other is really guilty, or at any rate is seriously believed to be guilty by by the defamer. Murmuring, which are words said to divide two people. Calumny, which is lying about person A to person B. Contumely, which is to accuse someone of something to their face, of bad things. Omission, failing to tell the whole truth or telling a partial truth to someone who deserves to know the full truth. Destruction of reputation without sufficient reason. Desire to be the center of attention. The lying tongue, which is speaking falsehoods with the intention of misleading others. The backbiting tongue, talking about others behind their backs, injuring their reputations through detraction. Detraction is the unjust damaging of another's good name by the revelation of some fault or crime of which that other is really guilty, or at any rate seriously believed to be guilty by the defamer. The indiscreet tongue, spreading confidential, unnecessary, or hurtful information about others. The flattering tongue, exaggerating the good qualities of others in order to ingratiate ourselves to them. The proud tongue, speaking boastfully or in an overly certain way. The overused tongue, saying too much, which usually ushers in sin by its excess. The rash tongue, speaking before one should, often without having all the information. The quarrelsome tongue, speaking in an overly opinionated way, attacking others personally and or provoking unnecessary division. The cursing tongue, wishing harm upon others, often that they be damned. The piercing tongue, speaking unnecessarily harshly or severely. The silent tongue, failing to speak up when we ought to warn people of sin and announce the truth of Jesus Christ. And now the questions. Have I wished evil upon another person? Have I damaged the reputation of anyone? Have I led anyone into sin by my words? Have I been angry or resentful? Have I harbored hatred in my heart? Have I been angry with God? Have I insulted a priest or consecrated religious person? Have I spoken about a priest or consecrated religious person in a derogatory manner? Have I lied? Have I gossiped? Have I spoken behind someone's back? Am I critical, negative, or uncharitable in my thoughts of others? Do I keep secret, which should be kept confidential? Have I gratified anger or harbored a desire for revenge? Have I fostered guile in my heart or made a feigned peace? Have I failed to utter truth from heart and mouth? Have I rendered evil for evil or done wrong to anyone? That I feel or exhibit impatience when wronged? Have I hated my enemies or any man? That I neglect to pray for my enemies in the love of Christ? Have I avoided making peace with any adversary before the setting of the sun? Have I rendered cursing for cursing rather than blessing? Have I been guilty of murmuring or detraction? Have I indulged in excessive talk, vain words, or unfitting laughter? Have I uttered evil and wicked words? Have I been jealous or given way to envy? Have I loved strife? Have I spoken falsely about others, engaged in gossip, or ruined someone's reputation? Have I respected the dignity of every person regardless of race, status, or background? Have I mistreated family members, coworkers, or strangers through selfishness or unkindness? Have I practiced self-control in speech, avoiding profanity, crude jokes, or harmful words? Have I used social media, TV, or the internet in a way that distracts me from my responsibilities or leads me to sin? Now we know that the Lord said that if your hand caused you to sin, that you should cut it off. So as a matter of prudence, if you find that the news shows, the news websites, social media, text groups, or anything else is a place that leads you to be tempted to sin, if you can't restrain yourself from making a pithy comment on someone's post, then my fellow saints in progress, you need to cut it off. Not your hand, not your thumbs, but your access to those sites and those venues. Because it is another sin, a sin against prudence, to knowingly place yourself in a situation where you were tempted to sin. So stay out of the echo chambers. And if you can't be charitable in your words, stay off the battlefield. That's it for this week, my friends. As always, love God. Love your neighbor. If any of those sins of the tongue apply to you, get to confession and stay in a state of sanctifying grace. And stay off the internet comments if you have to. Love and protect your children and teach them to be charitable with their words. Pray your rosary. Pray for peace. Pray for the conversion of hearts of all those who have fallen away, especially those who have fallen so far away from the light that all that is left is darkness. And most importantly, always remember, my friends, that you are a saint in progress. So go out there and be a saint.